So in terms of process, I mixed small batches of clay with New Zealand kaolin and a couple of other ingredients, literally like kneading dough. And then I put the small pieces of clay onto the bat and literally hand press them and cut them with templates. And they dried on the bats. Fired them in the kiln. And so then I applied the ceramic decal, black and white, refired them in the kiln. And so they would have shrunk about 20%. And this would be kind of like the result. So you can see that I would have put the image on the flat side that would have been against the plaster bat. And this would have been the rougher side. Some of them were actually too big, and I had to cut them with a wet saw. What's really lovely about the porcelain tiles, and what I was really hoping to achieve, is a translucency that are illuminated from an LED light. So you can see here the light shining through the porcelain. So just getting these ladies ready to go to Waterloo.
I'm going to just step back and give you a 101 history on indentureship. So my father's background is Caribbean. He was born and raised in Trinidad. And Trinidad and Guyana have about 45% each people from India, so South Asians background, and about approximately more or less the same percentage of people of African descent, and then the rest are a mix and from various different backgrounds. The South Asians came to the Caribbean after the British emancipated the slaves in the 1830s, and then the slaves were working the sugar canes, which were their cash crops, and they needed to find cheap labor to replace the slaves who were displaced. And they tried the Scottish, they tried the Portuguese, they tried the Chinese, but they settled on a very large colony that were predominantly vegetarian, cheap to feed, and willing and often desperate to get out of the country, and that was India. Between 1838 and 1917, 1 million Indians left to work the British colonies, plantations, and 500,000 of those went to the Caribbean. I was inspired by my great-great-grandmother Roonia. This lantern over here has her photograph, which was found recently, like within the last decade or so. And Roonia came from originally Allahabad in India and sailed from Calcutta in 1865 to Guyana and in Berbice, and worked the sugarcane fields there. And she lived to be 105, and that's why we have this photograph. So I was really intrigued and did a lot of research about the women, and I found out things that I didn't expect to find. I found out, for example, that the women didn't come in with their husbands. The men came alone, that the boats carried 10 to 15 to 20%. They had quotas of women, and these women were single. I discovered they were often widows, outcasts, sometimes prostitutes. A lot of these women came from difficult backgrounds. And I also found out that many of the indentured workers were coerced into signing up their fingerprints or their cross to and didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. And what they were getting themselves into was a contract which lasted 5 to 10 years, working for 1 shilling a day, literally living in the shacks and huts of the slaves, and living in pretty abysmal conditions, and often suffering the punishments and consequences that the slaves did themselves. So many people refer to them as the new slaves. So I really felt compelled to shine a light on these women, and these particular photographs that I have on the panes of porcelain are what are called the coolie bells. And these photographs would have been done largely by Western European photographers, and the women would have been dressed up and set in props by the photographers. It's not really a realistic portrayal of who they were and what their lives were, but they were made for the Western market, for postcards to send back and say, look at how well we're treating our East Indians, our Hindu types. And so that's what this series is largely about. And I made a series of 15 illuminated lanterns with all different women, and I was lucky enough to have access to a personal archive of images to use. And there's just the one lantern that has more recent images with my great-great-grandmother.